Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to see the room here finally filling up a bit with people these last minutes, and also to welcome our audience online. My name is Ineke Nandrup, and I'm very honored to moderate the session of today. In the following 90 minutes, we would like to address a key question that was actually already given to you by the title of the event that brought you here. What is actually necessary for successful finance for local adaptation? This question we would like to address with our dear speakers of today, with our panelists, from different perspectives, to really try to give a holistic answer to this question and also tangible solutions. At the end, we also will have time for some questions from the audience. So please, concentrate or focus during this event and have your questions ready for later. First of all, I'd like to hand over, though, to Annick Hildemand for the opening remarks of this event. Annick is Program Manager at the Tropical Forest Foundation OroVerde and will also introduce us to the topic of today. Annick, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Ineke, for moderating this event. A warm welcome to this climate finance event in the name of the German and Guatemalan government, in the name of OroVerde, ProNatura Mexico, and Haifa, Guatemala. I'm very honored to be here with you today at COP28. In the times of this climate crisis, we need multilateralism more than ever. July 23, this year, was the hottest month since 100,000 years. We had extreme weather events, such as droughts and floods all over the world. There is an urgent need for adaptation strategies at all levels, but especially at the local level where the people suffer most. We have to canalize finance to those who have the solution and can accelerate it. But how to do this? Today, the speakers will provide you with roadmaps on how to do this. You will learn on how governments, civil society from the global north and Mesoamerica and the private sector join forces. And such collaboration is only possible with a common vision. In our case, for instance, the common vision was creating a responsible global community, protecting and restoring ecosystems, and all this by putting local action in the center of climate protection. With these words, I wish you all an interesting and fruitful event. And I hand over again to Ineke. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Annick, for these opening remarks and especially for giving us more of a global perspective on the topic of adaptation finance and actually the urgent need for action that we have right now. Now I'd like to continue to also present the speakers of today that sit on our panel. On the panel, we have the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources of Guatemala. The ministry is represented by Andrea Fillon Gongora. She is advisor to the International Cooperation Unit of the ministry, providing over 10 years of experience implementing projects within the agricultural sector. Welcome, Andrea. The organization Haifa International Guatemala is represented today by Larry Paul Fuentes. He is Program Director of the Green Business Belt Program of Haifa that actually consists of a portfolio of 9 different projects in total. With ProNatura Mexico, we have representatives of Mexico's largest environmental NGO sitting here on our panel today. Kathy Gregoire is Executive Director of ProNatura Mexico and provides an essential link between private sector, local communities, and governments on different levels. Regina Cornish is Climate Change Director of ProNatura Mexico and offers great expertise in the topic of financial education, including and gender. I'd also like to welcome Ulrich Malesser on stage. He is Head of Division of the Tropical Forest Foundation OroVerde, overseeing several projects of climate adaptation and green finance in Latin America. Let us now come back Let us now find the presentation. Let us now come back to the central question we would like to address today. what is needed for successful finance for local adaptation? As I said, we would like to address this from different perspectives. Now starting with a political perspective and answer to this question. For this, I would like to hand over to Andrea Fiongongora from the Environmental Ministry of Guatemala.
Hello. Hi. Thank you. So I'm going to start with this. So from Guatemala's government, through the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources, we have the climate change law, which we are following, and it's also regarding our compromises to the Paris Agreement. And we have the national financing. It's all related to our plan. It's an action plan we have at national level. And for this, I'm going to share some of the numbers that we have for the national financing related to this. So for the period of 2016 to 2018, we're now working on the actualization of the data. We have the total directed, as you can see there, and it's a little chart, directed to the activities contained within the National Climate Change Plan. These activities are regarding adaptation and mitigation and transversal actions too. In the next slide, I'll show you how these are differentiated. So we have, as you can see, the numbers are in US million dollars, and it represents how much we have invested in the plan. So the funds are being directed especially from the government, financed by the government by an 88%. Then we have international resources, that's 11%, and recorded as private investment, it's 1% of what we have. These are the data that we collected along with the UICN and the ministry. Next. Thank you. So here we see the international climate finance provided and how it's been mobilized. Like I said before, we have mitigation, transversal, and adaptation. So adaptation actually fell by 4 million, which it represents the 14% in 2021, and resulting in it's a share of total climate finances declining from 34 to 27%, as you can see there. The adaptation is the green color in the graph, and we have transversal in yellow, and mitigation is orange. So as you can see, but at the same time we were having this fell, we also had the cross-cutting financing increase, but from 6 billion in 2020 to 11.2 billion in 2021. And then, okay, so what have we've been doing as a government in steps towards getting the finance for adaptation. We have our different policies and instruments at a national level to finance our NDCs. And we also have different national actors working towards it. We have the National Council for Climate Change, and what we do is identify also the source of investment that we can have. So national, public, and private, international, public, and private, and we address through different policy reforms and regulatory reforms, instruments, and business process. I'm gonna just move on to the next one. Okay. Important things that are mentioned towards our office is that it's important to have the information provided by our allies, and also we have this in all the process towards our NDCs. I'm just going to move forward. Okay, so now just to share with you some of our experiences, I'm going to address especially to the Green Climate Fund and the GEF Fund. It's from our point of view, it takes a long time towards all those processes. We feel like it's very important to have steps. It takes a long time to get the process done. So it's very important to know the process very well and be well prepared ahead of starting. It's very hard for the institutions to get accredited in order to be part of the fund. So it's also important to have them in our language. Most of them are in English. And that's something that happens not only in Guatemala, but in our region. So that's another recommendation, I guess, that we have, that it makes it even longer because we need to translate everything and it has to be official too. So that's part of the experiences that we've had. Adaptation in the government, our Department of Adaptation is actually low in resources and human resources. So that's another challenge from our government. But it's the work has been done, although it's been slow because we're having this kind of challenges. And now I also want to share with you something. As part of those small steps that we are taking, this is actually the first time that Guatemala has a pavilion here in COP. And so we would like to also invite you to it. This is our very first pavilion. So please come and join us. And we have some activities. So I would like to take this space to invite you to our pavilion because it's our very first. So here is the QR for our activities there, if you want to join us there. And I don't know if we're doing questions now, Zora.
Yes, thank you so much, Andrea, for providing us the political perspective on the question of today, especially the perspective of Guatemala. I'd like to take a little bit of time to dive a little bit deeper into what you just presented us, especially regarding the presence of you as a delegation here at the COP in Dubai. So what would be considered a Guatemalan goal for this COP28 in terms actually of adaptation, what we are discussing here?
Yes, thank you. Well, as you know, this COP is very towards loss and damages funding, and that's something that is very important for us as a vulnerable country. So as a delegation, we also have that to keep in mind, that also be part of those negotiations. So I think it's something that we can take back from COP that would be extremely important, is the loss and damages funding and steps towards getting more finance for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Can we please go to the next slide? Yes, perfect. So now, regarding our central question we'd like to discuss today, we would like to now approach it from the local perspective. And to do so, I'd like to hand over to Larry from Heifer International Guatemala.
Thank you, Ineke. It's a pleasure to be here. Heifer International is an international NGO that has presence in around 19 countries at this time. We are working since 1944, and we supported more than 42 million of farmers worldwide. My colleague here comes from Nigeria and see my shirt, and he said, "Oh, we work with Heifer in Nigeria." So we are an international NGO. But the good thing is that to achieve our mission, that is ending hunger and poverty by taking care of the earth, Heifer International led the countries to decide to have their own signature program. And in the case of Guatemala, we decided to support the spices sector through agroforestry systems. I don't know if you all know, but we in Guatemala, we are the first exporter of the world of cardamom. So we produce a lot of cardamom. We are more than 300,000 farmers that produce this crop. Also, we are supporting farmers from other crops or other value chains that are coffee, that are cocoa, oil spice, black pepper, and other spices. So the program aims to have to close the living income gap of the farmers by three components. The first component is the small farmer production, meanwhile protecting the forest. So we have more than 180 communities working with agroforestry systems in close relation with the municipalities of the area. The second component is more related to the social capital. We support farmers to get together and have agribusiness that owns by the farmers. So they can manage their funds and they can manage their products and dry. They can aggregate through the value chain and do transformation and also the processes in order to have their products dry to have a better opportunity to sell the products in a better price. And the third component is to access to capital and also marketing and trading. We support farmers and their organizations to access to finance through loans and also to have markets for the agroforestry products, such the ones that I mentioned before, like cardamom and coffee and cocoa. So what I want to highlight is this program. We have around 9 projects. Since 2012, we were working with OroVerde in a long-term relationship. And we are very happy to share that we have a lot of results in this coordination and alliance that we have with OroVerde. But one of them is the Forest Value Project that we have in coordination with Defensores de la Naturaleza, that is a local NGO, OroVerde, and also Javier International. And I want to present now the finance and access to credit program that we have, in which we have 4 sources of funds for the farmers. The first one is the revolving funds. That is like a school in which the farmers have received training in order to access to credits less than $500 to start with their first credit. So they receive a financial education in order to have this credit. Meanwhile, they'll prepare themselves to go to other levels of credit. After $500, there's 2 financial cooperatives in Guatemala that supports the loans for the farmers. So the other 3 sources of fund are from the Inter-American Development Bank, from the own funds of the cooperatives, and also from Javier Impact Capital, that is our branch that is related to access to finance. So these 3 components are the ones that are ruling in the program, and most of the farmers can access to credit for different opportunities of businesses that they have. Most of the farmers use the credit to buy more land or to have working capital to buy the product, especially the organizations use this credit as a working capital to buy the cardamom, for example, or for buy the cocoa to aggregate, to dry, and to sell to national and international markets. And a very important thing for us is the financial education. I could say that if a farmer receives a credit without financial education, we are going to be in trouble, because they could ask for the credit for other purposes, but not for the purpose they are looking for. So we have 3 modules on the financial education, and it starts with the first fund, less than $500. The first module is personal finance, because it's very important. Some farmers say, okay, what is a budget? They don't know what is a budget. That's the first thing to know. A budget is needed to know if I can pay a loan, or if I can reuse the fund, or what I want to do with my personal finances, or the family finances. Second, the savings, the importance of savings, because it's not only about asking for a loan and don't pay it. You need to have savings also. And the third thing is, let me see, responsible management and credit management. The way they are going to manage the credit, because in this case they need to know about how to reimburse the money in the value chain that they are looking for. So we have some pictures there. And we have our technician there called Douglas Jerónimo Pacay. He is making an assessment with the farmer in order to see if he's able to have a loan from the finance cooperative in Guatemala. And there are some pictures about the main value chains that we are working. Something that I forget is the beekeeping production, the honey production is very important, especially in the area where we are, because we work close to the protected areas, and these activities serve as a buffer to avoid the farmers go inside the protected areas and cut more trees. Some lessons learned that we identify is that, well, farmers if they don't have access or opportunity to have more income, they are going to, well, the forest is going to be in trouble. So farmers protect the forest with the agroforestry systems and also with non-timber products that they extract from the forest. So products such as coffee, cocoa, cardamom, spices, and honey play a key role in the conservation of forest. Also, we could say that the conservation of forest needs to have a financial education to produce in a sustainable way. This is because it's not only about producing, but it's also about financial management of the farms and also from the cooperatives that are near the protected areas. And also something that we have seen is that the credits are very important for the farmers in order to buy land, increase their production area. Some of them ask for a loan for increase the area of cocoa or cardamom or whatever. For transportation, some of them are buying trucks for do aggregation at the community level. Also primary and secondary transformation equipment, especially for drying the products in the area. And also, as I mentioned before, the working capital is very important. That's what I share today with you. I now move on the questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Larry, for your presentation. And also here, I'd like to take some minutes just to discuss some of the aspects you mentioned a little bit more in detail. So the approach you mentioned and you presented us sounds really promising, but what would you say, where did you experience or identify so far the main challenges, for example, regarding access to formal loans?
Well, I could say that the main challenges could be not have guarantees for the funds, for the loans. Mm-hmm. In this case, we are providing the farmers an opportunity to have a guarantee fund in which they cover the collaterals that they need to have for asking a loan in the cooperative. That's the main issue because sometimes they don't have titles of land, they don't have collaterals to have the loan. And also another thing that is very important is that in this case, women are also out of access to credit because they also don't have electricity bill or they don't have any formal way to demonstrate that they can access to a credit. So that guarantee fund is also very important to have access to women.
Thank you, Larry. And actually talking about these loans or these credits, what are the main uses? How can we imagine the main uses of these credits when we are talking about, for example, forest restoration?
Yes, I could say that it's very important to have these loans and credits for especially in the buffer area, because they recover forest and do restoration of forest with agroforestry system, and we see that as a barrier to avoid and prevent the damage of the forest on the protected area and in main areas. So what we can see is that if farmers has a good production and a good agroforestry systems that had a good price in their products, they are going to be able to protect the forest. So for us, it's a relation between the farmer, the protecting the forest, and also the access to credit.
Thank you very much, Larry. Let's move on to the next slide. And by doing so, coming back to our central question of the event of today and hearing actually the perspective of the multi-sectoral cooperation, which is also a very key aspect to really respond holistically to this question. So I hand over to Regina for this.
Thank you, Ineke, and thank you everyone for coming and being here in Dubai and choosing our excellent panel. So ProNatura Mexico, as we've heard before, is one of the most important NGOs on climate conservation and biodiversity in Mexico. So who are we? We implement programs and projects to help private sector and other partners into reaching the Sustainable Development Goals. We have more than 40 years of experience. And how we've been able to do this is we have created resilience in priority ecosystems in collaboration with diverse partners, through the implementation of all of these innovative strategies, which we'll be talking about in a bit, and through a vision where we actually use science-based targets to define them, nature-based solutions, and other different types of projects, which again, we'll be mentioning in quite a bit. Something about ProNatura Mexico to consider is we have both we've realized that by having a water programs, conservation programs, and climate change programs, and them working together, we've reached further goals. So basically, our water programs focus on how to give access to vulnerable populations through quality and quantity, as well as the efficient use of water for the industrial processes. As we know, the world and how it works, most of the products go through a lot of natural resources and water. Specifically, this is what we're trying to target. On conservation, we've also realized how the private sector also uses a lot of natural resources, and therefore there's a need to rehabilitate and restore all of these. And through climate change, the most important thing is to reduce the emissions as much as possible and ensure that they know how to do this. Again, in the climate change focus, we have both adaptation and mitigation purposes, and they all work together. So the difference, as Ineke was saying, is how does this differentiate from what our colleagues have been saying from the Guatemala government, Javier with a lot of credits and other types of programs that they mentioned in different countries, and us. We play and are the ally to the private sector in Mexico. As we know, the government try to push this agenda and are going forward, but sometimes coming from Mexico at least and in other countries, it can be a bit difficult. And understanding that the private sector is a bit more constant or has the need to continue, we try to help this vision. The cost of inaction outweighs its sustainable investments. And we've heard this throughout various speakers all around the world, and most importantly, here in COP. So knowing this, we were able to even publish, through our Cuencas Verdes, financed with our OroVerde partners, a study of an economic evaluation where we were able to measure the environmental socioeconomic impact of how much the natural protected area actually values and what it's worth. So how much does that actually mean, having resources, water, the people, and all of this going forward. And knowing this, we use this example and we've outlined to the rest of our portfolio. One of them knowing that the private sector has to alternately turn green or sustainable because in the long run it's not going to go anywhere and that's going to be sustainable. Therefore, the future, we need to help safeguard the private sector toward this green future and safeguard their own resilience and continuity through us. ProNatura Mexico's one of the biggest goals is to help this private sector halven the emissions by 2030 and then by 2050. We know this is a very, very ambitious goal and therefore do invite the private sector to do it, and we, in line with them, try to do this through SBTI's different programs, Science-Based Index, among others. The private sector, we also know, is driven, innovative, and has different financial flows. We know that the markets sometimes work in mysterious ways, so therefore we would like to work with the market to help it make it more sustainable and greener through time. Evidently, to get to this point, ProNatura Mexico has had a lot of different lessons we've been learning, we've been seeing, and how does it actually come about. So to obtain financial solutions coming from the private sector, we realized that through emphasizing collaboration, community, engagement, strategic planning, it comes to sustainable and effective solutions. And here I'll briefly mention 4 examples. One of them is Comunitario. This was financed by USAID, which is a public government resource, but also there's a lot of private investment into Comunitario. Why? This is the largest forest carbon credit capture project in Mexico. It's going throughout its livelihood from 2019 to its closing year in 2024. We will sequestrate over 1.5 million carbon credits. We'll create carbon credits, 1.5 million carbon credits, with the private sector and others. This will help compensate many of what we've seen in Mexico. Why? Because over 80% of our land in Mexico is basically forest. And therefore, this is in the hands of ejidos, so we've been able to use communities, private sector, to do this. Euroclima. We had another project financed by the Europeans where we were able to create different adaptation manuals, both in Brazil and in Mexico, to ensure that there was sustainability, biodiversity plans with a gender focus. Cuencas Verdes, once again, with our fine partners of OroVerde, which we're sitting here today, it's translated to green watersheds, Cuencas Verdes. We were able to actually target different local adaptation places in Atlautla, Chalma, Sierra de Guadalupe, and Xochimilco, as you can see on the screen. These different documents have actually become one of the main focuses in Mexico. We've even received a federal prize for all of this work where they're trying to replicate it in different scenarios. How did we do this? Understanding actually what each of these different locations needed, and then collaborating with the different beneficiaries within that sphere, we developed and managed different types of programs to getting to this result. And here a little fun fact if you haven't come to Mexico. One thing that we're very proud about is in Xochimilco. Xochimilco is one of the most valuable naturally protected areas. Mexico City, with all of its inhabitants, is around 22 million people or more, considering the surrounding areas. And if Xochimilco did not exist, Mexico City would increase 2 degrees Celsius. So by having this in place, and through ProNatura Mexico, we're developing a specific program for this area in line with all the different collaborators to ensure its longevity and that it goes through time. Another example is Sierra de Guadalupe. They're also a naturally protected area, and we were able just 2 weeks ago sign an agreement with the government to ensure that what we've already done will be replicated to another 5 naturally protected areas. And these are different ways how we've been able to do this. It's basically showing our objectives, getting these targets, being able to replicate them, and then encouraging the private sector to keep investing. So we've been making projects, sustainable products. And with this, we've been able to get the private sector to keep investing in all of these projects already existed throughout the long run. And lastly, neutralízate. Neutralízate means become neutral or neutralize. This is directly focused for the private sector, and it goes to the objective that I was mentioning about reducing emissions as much as possible. So accompanying the private sector, we've been able to reduce emissions, and then what can't be reduced, and if the company is willing to do it, we also have carbon credit options. And this is through the Neutralízate. Coming again for lessons learned and being very much precise, what we've realized is to do this, you always have to start with a case study or a diagnosis. Understand your audience and your people. This both on the supply and the demand side. What do I mean by this? Is knowing where you're going to work, what the space actually needs, and for who is actually going to go forward. This has been one of our ways to continue working with them. How? Through nature-based solutions. I'm not going to discuss that since I believe most of you already know. And science-based targets, and as well with the communities and the beneficiaries. We've realized that the most of our successes have come through always including the beneficiaries, not just in these environmental impacts, but also the socioeconomic ones. So talking a bit of what Javier mentioned, the importance of how to make sure that these beneficiaries are actually getting economic income, or how are they going forward. So by linking different projects that we have on the ground, we've been able to foster this and increase their livelihoods. We've also been able, we've seen very positive, how to use this project and amplify it or collaborate into different projects. And we've done this through one of our visions of Cathy Gregoire, through a strategic plan that we've had of these overall impacts and how all of our different projects align to this overall goal. And that's how we also have gotten more funding. Since it's all going toward a bigger objective and everything adds on, we've been able to tangibly see how we've been able to grow as an NGO, but also the impact it has had on the ground. And overall, something that has always been very positive to getting more financial resources, the importance of transparency. All of this, it could be through different accountability systems, particularly a CRM, among other tools, which we've seen have been key to growing. So, stating all of this, I would just like to conclude before giving Ineke the last remarks, is we've really seen how through the diagnosis, nature-based solutions, among all of these types of ideas, we've been able to go forward. And I guess as ProNatura Mexico, we have been able in the last years, and Cathy will talk more about this, seen the role of the private sector and how much of an ally we can become, because if not all of us work together, we won't really reach our 2030 or 2050 agenda. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Regina, for your presentation. And you stressed a lot the importance of actually private sector collaboration and your role as ProNatura in this collaboration. So I think I'd be very interested to hear a little bit further on, as an organization, how did you actually become, as an NGO, allied to the private sector? How did this develop?
Thank you, Ineke. I will first like to say, I believe in, not just because she's my boss, but Cathy Gregoire really had this vision of how to move forward to the private sector But really, it's the needs. I think right now, no organization, country, or actor can stay behind, but we all have to work together and try to move forward. And if we know that the private sector has a lot of financial resources and possibilities, it is the most important place to tap into money right now. Why? We've seen how most countries, and we will see it throughout these 2 weeks, will promise to do something for climate change. They will start to say that it is super important to reduce emissions and try to come up with all of these innovative ways, but that will start the government talking. In reality, what are governments? Made out of people, and the people to survive have made up businesses, companies, and actors. So we've realized that to tap into this whole idea of a society at all levels to really, really push a green agenda is through the private sector. And we've been very strategic about that and seen the results throughout these past few years. So that's a bit of why. And the how is through what I was mentioning previously, the efficiency, the ability to work with high expectations, replying, timings, transitioning, traceability, transparency. We believe that all of this has really led us to be key partners for the private sector in Mexico and hopefully other countries.
Thank you, Regina. And now a bit further coming back to the local aspect of adaptation, because we kind of don't want to lose that out of sight in our event of today as a focal point. What, out of your perspective, out of your experience, also of your project, what is key for a successful adaptation project?
I believe that a successful key adaptation is basically to see the program as a whole, right? To really understand the targeted population, the need, the space, and from that start to create an integral program management. What does this mean? That the program has to be flexible, has to be reliable, has to be resilient. Through this, use specific indicators and understand how to measure your program at the beginning and through time to actually make a difference and an impact. We also believe in seeing the gender component. I know COP is also going to be talking about gender, and we've seen it throughout these past few years, but the reality, it's true. If you do not include a gender component since the beginning, there will not be a sustainable change through time, and we've seen this multiple times in our diverse projects. We've also seen how working with the governments at all levels has been crucial. And Mexico is going through a current election in these upcoming months, so definitely being a key ally to all different levels of government to ensure continuity has been essential. Teamwork, accountability, as I mentioned, as well, and to ensure that everything that we have done, both on the ground with the beneficiaries, is long-lasting. Every project will have an ending. Yes, you can keep on building on that project, keeping asking for funding, replicate it, inviting others to come into play, but at some point, nothing gold can stay, and therefore it will end. So the most important thing is to ensure that the own beneficiaries and the own site is resilient enough to continue to become stronger and stronger and actually go through the impacts of climate change, which we've unfortunately seen have been devastating these past few months.
Thank you so much, Regina, for your presentation and also these answers to the questions. Let's now go to the next slide, and with this, coming back to our central question of today, and actually now hearing more from the perspective actually of global civil society. So to do so, I'd like to hand over to Uli.
Well, thank you very much. And it's also a pleasure from my side to speak here, and a warm welcome to all of you. I will talk about global civil society perspective on adaptation finance. Well, quickly about OroVerde. OroVerde is the Tropical Forest Foundation of Germany, and we aim to achieve a socio-ecological transformation in order to protect the tropical rainforest. We do this in a quite unique way as we work with local partners and co-design all projects. It's not us who put out the design, it's Hafer, it's ProNatura, and other partners that design the projects and programs, and then we seek funding and coordination and the consortium. I have 4 points now on the perspective of civil society regarding adaptation finance. So first is, and thank you, Andrea, of the Guatemalan government to point this out, we see a big gap on adaptation finance currently. And UNDP has calculated just in a report that came out before the COP that it is somewhere in between 200 million and 360 billion US dollars per year. And despite the clear signs of accelerating climate crisis and impacts worldwide, the adaptation finance gap is widening. Adaptation finance needs are at least 10 times as great as current international public adaptation finance flows, and at least 50% higher than previously estimated. Why? Because also, you made that clear, Regina, it's more costly to wait. And that takes place. And our current pathway is plus 2.4 degrees. Adaptation will be more costlier. And if temperature rises mass, it will be even more expensive. And that's why we think that adaptation finance is not the small sibling of mitigation. It should be strengthened dramatically, because from adaptation, well-being of humans and the avoidance of casualties depend. Civil society role and accessibility of funding is my next talking point. Much of available funding yet has not trickled down to farmers, indigenous peoples, and local communities. Much of the funding is not accessible by the most vulnerable, such as women, and Regina, you mentioned already gender, as well as Larry. They often do not hold the land titles, and that's why they cannot access such funding or finance. Or indigenous peoples, as they are less linked to the financial system overall, or subsidies are not designed for their conditions. While funding for business as usual industrial agriculture is widespread available and access is given. Civil society like OroVerde and its project partners can provide a shortcut from donor to local adaptation activities to be more efficient and ensure funding is really impacting on the ground activities. For this, adaptation funding instruments should have more open doors for civil society initiatives. The next talking point is private funding is needed for adaptation. The adaptation funding gap cannot be closed solely by public donors. The private sector systems need to get ready. Blended funding, such as combination of public subsidies with private loans or improved conditions for climate-resilient agriculture, could be a solution. But also purely private funding instruments could consider climate and biodiversity risks for improved conditions for those producers that adapt to climate change. And actually, we started an initiative with 2 UN institutions to develop an integrated climate and biodiversity risk management, short ICBRM. I think shortly you will hear more about that acronym. And we firmly believe it allows to design better green finance tools at large scales. And lastly, the finance sector needs more climate education. Larry, you pointed out financial literacy of farmers is an issue, but maybe also the financial sector has a task to do. So do banks and insurances understand that climate-resilient agriculture is more productive in the long term and less risky? I guess not. I mean, that's really just a little bit of black and white thinking, but let's come to make my point. Most financial instruments for farmers do not offer improved conditions for those that use climate-resilient practices. And how can a farmer start with doing it differently when no financial instrument is on offer that supports climate-resilient agricultural practices? If we can educate the finance sector, they could not only design improved financial instruments, but help farmers themselves for financial literacy. And the banks and insurances, they have the reach for a transformative change. We can put out the models and we can show it's working, but they have the reach to everyone. So the lessons learned. In a nutshell, I want to put out 3 points. Oh, let me click here too. Yes, so we want to hold, kind of not what's there, but okay. We want to hold our own government accountable to increase funding for adaptation, which means increased funding for adaptation. Our own government is Germany. The German Chancellor Olaf Scholz mentioned forests as an investment target in his speech on, when was it, on Saturday. While Germany contributes already around 6 billion euros annually, this might just not be enough. Greatly, OroVerde, together with its partners, is currently running 4 projects funded by the German climate change initiatives. All of these projects are co-designed adaptation programs throughout Central America and the Caribbean, and Regina mentioned already one of them. And the recent GEF8 funding round received pledges of more than $5 billion US. This is 30% more than before. Good news. But also, this is not enough for the tasks ahead. And we request Germany to lead more initiatives. We request the German government to support just transition, ensuring synergies between climate action, social justice, and the reduction of social inequalities. Some promising steps have been done by the government, like the feminist development policy and the feminist foreign policy. But can we move quicker to feminist financial architecture? Next point is increased involvement and access of civil society to adapt finance. Why? Civil society allows for a north-south relation on ice height. As we mentioned, we co-design our invention instruments and governance structures. This makes them durable and inclusive. Civil society allows for highly effective climate finance as we work with local civil society partners and first-level organizations. And lastly, to point out again, civil society allows for an inclusive, just transformation, climate adaptation finance that is equally accessible for women, that are adapted to indigenous people, that can be accessed by young people, that allow funding in and for local communities. Strengthening climate literacy in other systems, finance sector and professional education. We need to start educating other systems, such as the professional education and the finance sector, on climate change adaptation. Think about an agricultural engineer usually has not much heard about local nature-based adaptation in the formation at the university. On adaptation, he or she will think about artificial irrigation, new plant varieties, or sophisticated agrochemicals, while the solution could be nature-based and rather simple. Keep trees, keep the earth covered with vegetation, keep nature vegetation in vulnerable places, and so forth. In short, ecosystem-based adaptation. Let's think about bank and insurances. Today offer good conditions for a production system that provides short-term return. Yet inclusion of long-term productivity and climate risk management is not widespread. We need to help the financial sector in climate literacy. If that takes place, there can be loans and insurances with preferred conditions for farmers that use better practices. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ulrich. Maybe we can go to the next slide to also here take some time for further question and dive a little bit deeper into the part of this discussion that you just presented. So if you're saying that the financial sector actually needs to step more up and move more towards adaptation finance, where do you actually see strategies to do so, or strategies to support this?
Well, I think two topics stand out, and my colleagues before mentioned them. So one is we need governments to step in. We need local governance structures, but we also need regulation. We need, at the end of the day, laws that promote green finance instruments, or even reverse, that prohibit funding activities that are causing damages to climate and biodiversity. And that's taking place all around where we live and in the Global South. Think about big plantations. They get funding. And I think that's just not right, because they damage the biodiversity and they damage the climate with forest destruction, for instance. That's one thing, so regulation. And I think also from the European side and the German side, there can be regulations in place. And there are some regulations that are in place already, like the new Deforestation-Free Act. But I think on the finance system, a little bit more could be done to shepherd the finance system towards funding resilient practices. But on the other side, I think it's the question of a business case. We need to be able to show that climate resilient agricultural practices are profitable. We need to make them profitable. I firmly believe they are profitable, because that's why your initiatives are ongoing. But we need to show the real business case, including also the risks that such practices are avoiding. And on the long term, this is better investment than practices that do not take these type of risks on board.
Thank you very much, Ulrich. And coming back now again more to the local aspect of our session of today. So out of the experience of your projects in international cooperation of civil society, which project activities, project elements would you see key or recommendable to actually, to make adaptation work on local level?
It's a participatory governance structure on the local level. It's running the cost-benefit analysis for the region you work in. And I think it's use new technologies. With remote sensing, you can identify now the places of risks which you'd have to take care in order, for instance, on green watersheds to protect the water. And water is a good that you can make marketable. So if you can show by protecting the watershed where the water comes from and what the costs are involved, you can go to the ones that use the water and make them pay for it. Well, otherwise they have to invest into artificial irrigation systems or maybe cannot produce anymore. So I think it's a direct trade that you can, at the end of the day, do.
Thank you very much, Ulrich. Let's pass on to the next slide. I think so far we got a pretty good overview of the perspectives and the experience of our panelists of today. Yes, that's perfect. So now we would like to open the session to questions from the audience. Here we've listed again the names of the panelists of today, so you can address one panelist directly or have an open question to the whole panel. I don't know how to do it best here. If someone could come around, pass a microphone to someone raising a hand with a question. Yes, so I think that's the way to do it. And my colleague will help facilitating it to the microphone. Yes.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Amos Kamara from Sierra Leone, Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change. Thank you all. My question is going, I don't know, is Larry Paul? Yes, thank you. In your presentation, you did mention about the use of or management of the aspects where you're raising bees for honey production in a protected area, which is also being used as a means of preventing communities from accessing the forest, whether through the cutting of trees or any other livelihood activities. I don't know whether you also carried out an assessment to know how effective it was, especially when you have farmers or smallholder farmers around doing farming activities. Maybe they'll be using some agrochemicals or the likes. I don't know whether you did that aspect, or is it something that in the future you establish a separate forest for beekeeping? That's my concern. Thank you.
Yes. Well, actually, we did an assessment every time we establish a beekeeping production in the area, because not all the farmers can have access to honey production in the same area, because you need to have a separated area from 3 kilometers from one productive area or beekeeping area to another beekeeping area. So what we are doing is working in the buffer zone to have that hives go inside the protected area to have the production of honey from the protected area, but is surrounded the main zone of the protected area. So what we are doing is do the assessment in order to know how many farmers we are going to have as beekeeping producers in the area, but at the same time, what kind of flowering and what kind of blossoms are we producing or having the trees, because you know, when you have a honey from different sources of flower, you have a better extra income and a better price. So in this case, especially if it's in a protected area, you are going to have a diversity of flowers in which you capture the nectar of the flowers and produce it in honey. So the honey is sold very well because it's from this border from the protected area, and we do assessments, and we need to ask for a permission in an institution called REGAPI that belongs to the Ministry of Agriculture to establish a new beekeeping productive area. That's the process. We do an assessment for the farmers, but at the same time, we do all the process with the Ministry of Agriculture to establish a new area of production of honey.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm Sakeli. He's my colleague. We are from Sierra Leone, from the Ministry of the Environment too. Thank you very much. I think my question also will go to you, especially in the aspect of your agroforestry and the activities you talked about. And you said you gave out loan or credit to the farmers. How was the selection done? How do those people qualify for them to be given the loans or the credits? What are the sustainability strategies? Like you said, there are no guarantee. Nobody, a bond, maybe a bond like you say, okay, you'll be given this, you have something in replacement for this. If, for instance, if you misuse these funds, you are not able to pay back, this thing will be held, at the end of the day to repay the loans. And the criteria being used for the selection of the farmers, to the sustainability, and also, let's say, for instance, if a farmer, let me say if it's a pilot process you've done, you selected maybe 10, 20, 30 farmers at the end of the day, and they all fail to repay that loan. How do you continue in terms of sustainability with that project? Thank you.
Thank you. The first thing is that we don't give the credits. We do all the assessments and support the farmers in order to, this assessment could serve as a guarantee for the financial cooperatives to give the credit the farmers. And what we do is that we prepare the farmers with financial education to do the budget, to do the savings part, and also the budget repayment. And that plan is presented to the financial cooperative. We do the return of investment study to see if the agroforestry system is going to produce enough to repay the loan. But at the same time, we have a criteria, because it's not only supporting farmers that has less than 0.5 hectares. It's not going to repay a loan if they don't have enough land and enough production to pay the loan. So that's the reason we are working with more or less the farmers that has from 0.5 hectares to 2 hectares, and they can repay the loan. So so far we don't have a single, well, we have 1 or 2 farmers that don't pay at time the loan, but it's not to Heifer, it's to the cooperatives that we are working on. So they have their own studies, their own protocol, their own processes, but we prepare the farmers to access to that loans.
Good afternoon. I don't know whether you have a reaction to that one? No? Okay. So, my name is Abili Katontoka. I'm from Zambia. I work with a bank. So it's very interesting to hear the financial sector being put on the spotlight, that we need education in adaptation finance. A bit of a background, we are actually undergoing accreditation process for the Adaptation Fund. So we sort of have taken that step. 2 questions and 1 a comment. Maybe let me begin with a comment. As you're explaining what you're just explaining, we already have a program in place where we are giving loans to smallholder farmers using carbon credits as collateral for their loans. And so I think maybe on the sideline I can probably explain that to my brother here, and he can appreciate that. I think what I wanted to really point out, or even get first your thoughts on, is on the risk mitigation factors that you've put in place for those arrangements that you're making for the farmers to be able to access those funds. In the event that whatever the project is being implemented does not deliver the returns, or the returns, how are the financial institutions protecting themselves against that loss? That's, I think, one point I wanted to get your thoughts from as a lesson learned. And then, Yurik, yes. You said that you don't design projects, but you work with project developers on the ground. And your reach, I just wanted to get clarity on your reach. Is it a specific region? Because I think all I could hear from here was Mexico. I couldn't see anything about this side of Africa. I couldn't. So I just wanted to get that understanding, because I hear where you're coming from, and I think that aspect of collaboration. As a financial institution, we have a huge pipeline of customers coming in wanting to do project development, but at the end of the day, it's accessibility to pre-financing for implementing a carbon project, or even accessing a market where they can sell the carbon credits. So I think that is what I wanted some clarity on. Thank you so much.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, let me just go quickly first, and thank you for asking about other regions and whether we are active there. Just historically, we are more biased towards Latin America. It's no other reason. But on the other side, I think in terms of principles to co-design with national, local partners, that would work elsewhere too. And also, I think the question of learning together at the end of the day, I think that's what it is. So the financial sector learning from us, and we from the financial sector. But the interesting thing would be, and it's nice to hear that there are these type of initiatives, because you can generate reach. And we don't put the burden on the farmers to say, yes, okay, the farmer first needs to learn something, and then, no, it's maybe the others that can offer something and do the first step and do the homework for adaptation. That was the point. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, regarding the risk analysis and risk assessment, well, I could say that things are changing very fast, because, we have this last dry season in Guatemala. We lost a lot of cardamom blossom and flowering, and also in the cocoa sector, we are receiving some storms that at the same time you have a very dry season, very strong, and also the rains in the last rainy season was very accumulated in few days. So the risk assessment is changing a lot, and I think that we need to take into consideration that to do the new analysis in the year 2024, because every year is worse. The average production in cardamom is around 2,000 pounds by hectare. In the dry cardamom, in this year was like 15 or 14. So that is something that we need to take into consideration when do the return of investment to repay the loan. Because if we have less production, farmers are going to be in trouble to pay the loan, to repay the loans. So the prices increase because there's a few product in the area. So I think that we need to, it's a good point to reconsider the risk analysis that we are doing to access to credits.
Thank you so much. Caro is my name, from Uganda, Agape Earth Coalition. My question goes to the gentleman from Haifa. You talked about helping farmers to get market for their produce, right? There was a scenario in my country, I remember very well, I was a young kid, where they produced vanilla. So it even happened to my grandmother. So they met them in a group, told them what vanilla is going to do for them. They cut everything down. They cut the coffee trees, they cut everything. They grew the vanilla. Then after some time, I think there came monopoly and the price of vanilla really went down, and with a lot of anger, people cut down the vanilla. So literally now we are in that process. So if you're introducing something to the people, it's even hard for them to appreciate where you're coming from, because I think they have really been disappointed. So I don't know how you can help with that. Thank you so much.
Excellent question, because we are not trying to diversify that much to cut other things that people are still growing. In the case of Guatemala, cardamom has more than 120 years to grow in the area, in the country. But what we are looking for is to diversify for other crops like cinnamon, like allspice, like turmeric, that are not well used in Guatemala or very common in Guatemala, to have a diversified and seasonally production income, starting with cardamom from October to February, and then goes to black pepper, March, April, and then goes to allspice, July, August, and then return to the cycle. So to have 3 or 4 sources of income instead of because the farmers do the same in our country. They cut everything and they want to have a lot of price, but when the price go down, they cut everything again and restart again with another crop. So we are not doing that. We are thinking that we need to remain with the low cost, and also we do market analysis with the farmers in order to see that there are cycles in the production and also in the price. So if you remain in the low price, you are going to have a high price later because there are cycles in the market. So that is part of what we analyze with the farmers in order to avoid to cut, for instance, the coffee or the cocoa that has dramatic downs, and wait for the good times.
Maybe I would want to add something. I cannot contribute to the spice market, but to cocoa and coffee. And here we are trying to formulate the concept of shared responsibility along the whole supply chain. So we want that from the downstream end of the supply chain, being that the retailers or brand owners in Germany and Europe, they take on board some of the responsibility for the upstream supply chain. And one way of doing this is that they pledge to exclude unfair production practices. Because, I mean, why is there an overproduction? Maybe because some others cut down a lot of forest and produce a lot of material suddenly. Maybe also with some support of banks. So the shared responsibility should develop a protected supply chain, basically, where the conditions are fair and where improved practices have a chance.
Thank you. My name is Tiina Huvio. I come from Finland, but I'm here on behalf of AgriCode Alliance. It's an alliance that has 13 members from different parts of the world supporting farm organizations. I have some comments and then some questions. Well, first of all, I'd like to remind you that there is already an entity who invests more than $368 billion annually, and those are the smallholders themselves. They do the adaptation funding at the moment. We can compare that to $230 million. So farmers themselves they invest more than 1,000 times more. And therefore, I think that we should be talking much more with them how to use the money wisely. And now there has been a lot of discussion on different kind of systems, kind of awareness raising, financial awareness or literacy for farmers, or climate literacy for the banks or financial institutions. I think there's very little attention given to how much you should work with the organizational strengthening and development and the technical advice. We always talk about these things as they would happen by itself if you give a couple of training and then it goes. But what we're hearing here is like a lot of examples why farmers, even if they're practicing something for some period of time, comes something more lucrative, and then, you know, we change again. So there is a need for institutional, longer-term work, extension, and preferably with local organizations. So I would like to hear a little bit more of your views on how to take this more on board when you talk about climate finance or when you talk about adaptation finance. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, at least from our part, from the different projects I quickly mentioned, Comunitario, which is the largest generating carbon credit project in Mexico with over 7 states and 59 communities. And what we have been seeing is just that, no? Ejidos, which is a comunidad in Mexico, which is different. It's like a regional community where it's very marginalized or vulnerable, or tends to be, not all of them. And for the first time, these communities are receiving millions of pesos. So definitely we've been seeing this transition, and as you mentioned, the importance of how to bring financial literacy, education, and also a plan. For the first time, they're receiving income that had never happened. So we, at least through Comunitario, we have been trying to help this, but it's definitely at a second level, and we expect a bigger project to continue in this sense because of these needs, but also taking in consideration that Mexico has a lot of danger in the part of narcotráfico. So this is a different sphere where we're also seeing the need to keep these municipalities or localities or ejidos private. So it has been some of the difficulties we have been facing, at least with Comunitario. But with Cuencas Verdes, the Green Watersheds project, we were able to provide different trainings and capacity buildings to the communities where we do work with, for example, in Atlautla and Chalma. And for over 10 modules, we were able to give them financial literacy, climate literacy, among others, and through different evaluations and indicators, monitor how they're working. And the biggest impact we have seen is that through this project, most of the families are now have the capacity to feed themselves, so that means that they're spending less money on buying other foods, but also the surplus produce is being sold. So definitely saying that how do most money or adaptation finance is within the own farmers, and we have seen that, although we do work with specific family women holders specifically who have more vulnerabilities economically, but also with their different communities. We've seen how through this project they were able to overcome different thresholds, improve their livelihoods, and in a sustainable way. So definitely we are trying to see how to replicate this at a bigger scale in Mexico, and to keep going, but it's definitely two different things to consider, because like this adaptation one is definitely low scale in the sense of it's a lot of people we can reach, but it's longer through time, versus an ejido, it can be hundreds of people, and definitely how to use that money. So those are two different ways that we've been trying to see it, but definitely both are ways that they're getting more income in a sustainable way. And now what we hope, and we're using other actors and allies to do, is join more forces to really create something more tangible when it comes to financial literacy and financial education. So that has been at least our experience in ProNatura, and we hope that we'll keep growing in this aspect.
Yeah, I would just quickly answer and put out the term mutual learning instead of capacity building. I think you are completely right, because adaptation practices are there. We can talk about it with the farmers, how to improve that coming from science or from also an NGO perspective. But I think what the point here was a little bit, from my end at least, was to have another sector to learn from there and to support what's already done by the farmers. And very often, I think, also in our projects, we learn from the farmers, from traditional systems, keeping forest reserves, making mixed intercropping systems, agroforestry, silvopasturage systems usually are quite traditionally established already. We keep them and we give it, let's say, a new basis of science. And I think this we would want to give to the financial sector and say, look, this is a place where to invest. This is the future at the end of the day, because it's resilient and it's adaptable.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for one more question, but please a brief answer. Thank you.
I'm Sonia Cooper from Australia, so we're Indigenous people on the Murray River. I have a question specifically for you, Regina, in how to obtain financial solutions. You spoke about collaboration, community engagement, and you also spoke about strategic planning. And as part of those manuals, you spoke just previously in your previous answer about financial literacy. Is there literacy and education around irreversible damage and loss and damage that goes into your manuals? Is there anything specific about how not to keep destroying country as part of that? Like adaptation is one element, but I'm just wondering where the baseline is for irreversible damage, and maybe is that written into the manuals and part of the strategic planning, and our community's engagement actually talking about country is destroyed?
If you don't mind.
No, of course.
Thanks. That's a really good point. And the whole loss and damage point, I think, should be written into the manuals. Hopefully, with the new global risk report coming out in February, they'll have some tangible, concrete numbers on the cost of inaction. We saw it just recently in Mexico, where Acapulco was completely destroyed, a major tourist destination, where people left to fend for themselves, where most of the population depends on tourism. There's damages that will probably they're not going to be recovered, and there's nobody raising out their hand and saying we're going to pay for that, and we're going to pay for that opportunity cost of not being able to operate as a tourist destination. So absolutely, I think we need to lead by example, and in terms of local organizations like ours, having those kind of manuals integrated into our sustainability plan is important. And hopefully, coming out of the COP this year, loss and damage will be one of the first priorities.
Much to all of you for all your questions. I think it's always really nice to have such an active participation and such a vivid interaction between the audience and the panel. And please also, if you have further questions, really feel free to also approach our panelists just after the session, exchange your contact details, ask them further questions. So that's what they will also stay here for. So as a brief wrap-up, I'd like to ask all of our panelists just for really like a one-sentence statement, coming back to our central question. So out of your perspective, what is needed for successful adaptation finance? One sentence, please, one call to action.
Thank you. I guess from the government point of view, it would be to have clear, organized process, to have speed up the process for accreditation in order to be able to implement the funding. And also, like I said before, adaptation needs to be adapted into our language too. So we also need that from our region to have processes in Spanish in our case, so the government can be more efficient in performing this funding. Yeah.
Well, in my case, I could say that involve the farmers, involve the contribution on the farmers, on the finance for local adaptation. I think is very important to acknowledge the contribution of the farmers in the finance for local adaptation.
It would be 3 points: collaboration between all of the actors, public, private, and the communities and beneficiaries. Safeguards, make sure that all that you're planning has a risk analysis and how to also make impact, and definitely strategic planning in the long run.
Well, from my end, conversation and mutual learning, like we are doing it here, but that was just one point. The other point is, I think we need to be able to make the business case. We need to get the numbers right. I think we need to calculate what is the risk mitigation value of climate resilient farming, and we need to monitorize its benefits. And by this, we can convince people that are looking on each coin.
Yes, thank you so much for this calls to action. For the closing remarks of today, I'd like to then open up
Well, thanks everyone. But first of all, thanks to our panel for an enlightening discussion about what we can do right, and thanks to all of you for sticking around to the end. Talking about risk, adaptation finance fell 14% in 2021. Interesting and ironic on the heels of a global pandemic that was a perfect example of how unprepared we are. 18 months of high temperatures, harvests lost in multiple parts of the world, and perhaps a lack of understanding how things work in the process. I think some of the key learnings, just picking up some of the points from our panel, access to funding and credit, absolutely, but always when looking at scale. And this mutual learning between the communities and organizations like our own, I think, has been fundamental. Local partners being part of the process. I think I was just in a panel where there was discussions about a disconnect between the global north and the global south, and how the global north is pushing projects to be implemented by the global south without having the global south as a part of the discussion, as a part of the agenda. This is a perfect example how we did that, and I think local partners, trusted partners on the ground with boots on the ground are key. Another important factor, the private sector. In our case, in ProNatura Mexico, I think we were able to accelerate learning, be on a fast track to best practices from some of our partners, from private sector partners. I think I tend to agree with our friend from Finland. I think you were talking a little bit about abundance theory. There is a hell of a lot of money out there. I think we just need to be able to ensure that we're not diluting our projects and that we're looking at scale and size. And the best and fastest way to implement these projects is to have local partners that are ensuring that we're maximizing impact. And I think sometimes it gets a little bit lost. I think in our case, the importance of impact and science-based targets has been first and foremost. And I think a lot of our partners in Guatemala, Dominican Republic, and Cuba were on that same page. And finally, Happy Health Day. Obviously, we need to have that discussion about health and climate change, and how we as a species are being affected, and how this not inaction will have serious costs. And finally, AI. We briefly mentioned artificial intelligence. I think we do need to think bigger. I think we need to be talking about how artificial intelligence can resolve more complex problems and achieve scale and speed, because evidently we need to have bigger, better projects with multiple partners that have a bigger impact, because there's just not enough time to avoid the 1.5 degrees. So thank you again to our partners and to the German government for funding this project that will be coming to an end this year into December 15th, and we look forward to future projects with public funding as well as private sector. Thank you all.
Thank you all for your attention. Thank you all for coming here, and especially thank to all of our panelists for their discussion, their presentation, and their work. Thank you so much.
Sí, luego no, mi correo, luego es el personal.
Congratulations, everyone. Good job.
Felicidades. Congrats. And look, 5 minutes to spare.
Congratulations.
Sí, right on.
Tomamos una foto.